Welcome everybody to the February 1st meeting of the Transportation Advisory Committee. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Nick Pappas.
Here.
Mariana Hill.
Here.
Phil Posner.
Here.
And Mark Galis.
Here.
And I'm Laura Davis. And all right. So we are here today. The first order of business on our agenda is to review and approve minutes, but I failed to assign somebody to take minutes last time. So we have the recording and the transcript. And since it was my mistake, I'm happy to prepare the minutes and bring them to the next meeting for us to approve, unless somebody wants to jump in and volunteer.
I second your volunteer.
Okay. All right, and now I need a volunteer to take meeting minutes for today. I'm not entirely sure whose turn it is, so if somebody could just jump in.
I'll do it.
Okay, Phil is going to be our meeting minute taker today. Thanks, Phil. All right, so the next order of business is a chair's report. I have a variety of things that I wanted to share with you today. Most of them are updates on things that we've talked about. We referenced at our last meeting. But the first thing that I want to say is that tomorrow the League of Women Voters is having a First Friday program at 10 a.m. at the Goodwin Forum, and the topic is healthy transportation in Concord. I have been asked to speak. They also asked Mark to speak. And Steve Dukrin, the town engineer, will also be speaking at that program. Hopefully Beth Williams will be speaking. So we'll be talking about transportation in relatively broad terms. I have posted this event as a meeting of the TAC if TAC members want to attend, so that if we have a quorum, we are all above board. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was able to attend that if they want to. And I think that if there was interest in other TAC members joining the Q&A, I'm sure Diane Proctor, the person who's putting it together, would be thrilled to have more TAC members.
Where is the meeting being held?
It is being held at the main branch library in the Goodwin Forum. It's also a hybrid meeting, so folks can join virtually as well.
And what time is it?
And it's at 10 o'clock. It's from 10 to 11:30, correct, Mark?
I believe so.
Yeah.
That's right. Hour for presentation, so to speak, and half an hour for questions.
Yeah. Any questions about that? Great. All right, so the second thing is a follow-up on something that we spoke about at the last meeting. We talked about trying to coordinate a little bit more closely with Acton. I did have a relatively brief conversation with Franny Osman, who's a member of the TAC over in Acton. I spoke with her just before the MassDOT Transit Innovation Grant was due. And so microtransit was the most of what we talked about in our conversation. Acton is actually applying for the same MassDOT Transit Innovation Grant as Concord is for the same sort of microtransit service. So I was able to connect Franny and Beth before the application deadline, and both of those applications were actually edited to reference each other's applications. And indicate sort of an interest in a regional transit approach. Franny and Beth both felt that would likely improve our chances of getting grant funding, since MassDOT typically likes regional programs. So that was the main thrust of our conversation. Some other highlights is Acton has applied for an electric van through their RTA. Acton's a little bit different than us. We're an MBTA community, and they're part of the Lowell Regional Transit Authority. So they have sort of different sources of funding than we do, and a different structure for their transit. But I think that we have a lot that we could learn from them. They do have a fixed route service in their town. So that's something I wanted to say. And then the other thing that Franny's talked a little bit about is that they established a sidewalk committee several years ago, And the sidewalk committee's task was to evaluate their existing sidewalk network and prioritize a list of sidewalks to be built. So I think that we as the TAC may want to take a look at that sidewalk plan, as well as Lincoln's plan, which I referenced in my chair's report last time that we met. Lexington also has a really great plan, and since we're in the midst of this comprehensive transportation plan, I think that looking at our neighbors to identify opportunities for collaboration, to replicate some of the good work that they've done, to avoid maybe some mistakes that if you don't like something in the plan, we can highlight those. So I just want to bring all of those things up to the committee members' attention. Confirm you are speaking a language. All right, we had something pop up on the screen. All right. Any questions about that conversation with our counterparts in Acton? All right.
I do have one question.
Sure.
What is Franny's role in the town?
She is like us. She's a member of the Transportation Advisory Committee. I believe she's the vice chair
Okay,
of that committee.
okay, got it.
All right, another thing that I wanted to include in my chair's report, and I think that if there's interest in this, I will put it on an agenda for us to discuss at a future meeting. But there is some pending legislation that pertains to something that came up in some past meetings. There was a question about using automated enforcement to help control speed. Somebody asked, I believe it might have been a member of the public, asked if that was a possibility. And I explained that in Massachusetts, automated enforcement isn't currently something that we permit. But there is pending legislation. There's both a House side bill and a Senate side bill that would allow for the use of cameras to enforce certain motor vehicle violations. And that includes running red lights, passing a stopped school bus, and speeding. So if this was something that we felt would be a good tool for us to have in our toolkit here in Concord, we as the Transportation Advisory Committee could write a letter advocating for this change in the law so that this would be an option that was available to us. Is there an interest in discussing this at an upcoming meeting by anyone?
I think the first question is, there are deadlines coming up fairly soon on when things have to report out of committees, I think, to be considered for this session. So knowing what the relevant deadlines are would be important, because we wouldn't want to put the work in and then find out we were too late.
Well, if we have some time between our next meeting and those deadlines, would this be of interest to the committee? I can look into those deadlines.
Well, the deadlines and then the actual text, because if we're going to do anything, we have to understand what's being proposed, right?
Yes, I'm happy to include the text of the bills. I mean, they're available on the state legislature's website, and they're pretty understandable. They're not incomprehensible legally.
Yeah, but we don't know the numbers or names. So if you
Oh,
know,
yes,
send us the
I do
links.
know them. So the House bill is H3393, and it's called an act relative to automated enforcement. And then the Senate side bill is S1483. And I don't have the name in front of me, but it's similarly named. I believe that the Senate side bill is a pilot program, so it would limit the number of communities that could use the camera enforcement. And the House side bill, I believe, is more broad, although it might be the opposite, but I'm pretty sure that that's the way it is. So what I'll do is I'll put this on our next agenda if it seems like we have enough time to take some action on it. Is that good?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think it's very important to consider this as a potentially very valuable tool to be applied to use selectively. I would recommend that the links to those laws or something of that be posted on the tax website, because I think the public, obviously the broad public is the only force that can really motivate legislators.
Yes. Let's not do any more deliberation on this. I'll put it on our next agenda and we can, I will send around, I'll include the text of the bills in our next meeting packet. And we can talk about that. Are you able to hear okay?
I can hear very well, but Bernie can't hear when he's talking down there at the other end.
Oh,
I
really?
hear very well.
I'll speak louder. Is that?
That would be good.
Thanks for
Okay,
letting
thank
us
you.
know.
Raise your hand if you can't hear.
Yes, please do. All right, so that was automated enforcement. Very quick update. I just wanted to let folks know that Elizabeth Hughes, in the planning office is submitting, a grant application for the Assabet River pedestrian and bike bridge today. So there's no action for us to take on that, but I did want to give folks that update since that's been, a topic of intense interest. So that's exciting.
And what is the substance of the grant?
I don't have all the details. I think that perhaps we can have Elizabeth present at an upcoming meeting to give
Okay.
us some more information. All right, and so that's those are the main updates. I also wanted to just give everyone a heads up that we will have on our next agenda, I'm gonna put on our things to discuss, just taking a look ahead to membership. We have many of our terms, several of our terms are coming to an end at town meeting. So I just wanted to put that on everyone's radar. Everybody, I think everyone has the opportunity to renew for another term if we want to, but we may want to do some staggering since at least Nick, myself, Dan, and Phil all started at the same time when the committee was reformed. So we may want to stagger some of our subsequent what am I trying to say? Terms. If anybody has thoughts about that they wanna let me know, that would be great. And then the other thing is that I have been chair for over a year, so I do want to give others an opportunity to chair this group. Mark has indicated an interest in chairing the group, but if anybody else has an interest, please let me know and we can I'll put that on our next agenda. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that a number of committee members have been sending me articles that are of interest to them, that they have said it would be interesting to share this with the group. I have not forwarded those along because I don't want to break open meeting law. But I think maybe it would be helpful if you see something that you want to share with the group, if you can send it to me and say, I'd like to have, 3 minutes to share this with the group at an upcoming meeting, I could put it on an agenda, unless anybody has a suggestion for how we should do that better. Because I've been getting a lot of great information from all of you, but I want to make sure that we can share it with the public and share it with each other.
Yeah, I think
There used to be a place on our website where there were just random things related to transportation, and I would think that would be a reasonable place to put them if it's still there.
I do have to meet with Heather to go over some updates to our website. For instance, we're meeting on a 3-week cycle now, and I believe our website is out of date. So we need to fix that. So we can certainly reestablish an area where we can post things.
Yeah, I think having a linked page or an area where posting documents that members of the TAC think might be helpful for public discussion. And I do believe that sharing documents without opinions is pretty okay, but if they're also, vis-a-vis the open meeting law compliance, but especially if you post it right away for the public, then it's all out in the open.
Okay.
And I think there are a lot of such documents, right, that we
Yeah.
come across.
Tons.
Tons.
All right. Well, if there's something that you want to share, then if you could, I don't have direct access to our webpage, so we'll need to just figure out a good process for having Heather post those things or someone else from the town staff post those things. All right, so that's my chair's report. Any questions before we move on? Okay, great. So I'm gonna hand it over now to Phil and Mark, who were tasked with attending the Finance Committee meeting to talk about transportation infrastructure investments. And they said that they would do one or both of you would do an update at this meeting, so I'll give it over to you guys.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So, at the, FinCom meeting on Thursday, the 18th, Phil and I both, at the initial public comment, spoke about, transportation-related, investments or, needs, for the fiscal year 25 budget. I specifically highlighted two items, very specific items, the $4.1 million request for public works for maintenance and care of our road infrastructure, and pointed out how that's important for ordinary use and emergency use and serves everybody. It's very important. And I also mentioned a $1.3 million item specifically for improvements, highlighting, you know, concerns at congestion and safety concerns at town centers. One thing I observed during the meeting, Phil and I stayed through the meeting, was that several members of the FinCom, including the chair, in their conversations there with the town manager who was present, emphasized the importance of knowing about you know, the impact of underfunding and kicking expenses down the road, and that they really wanted to know and have brought out, you know, 5-year, 10-year plans of expenses, both so that they could make sure we're funding the necessities and being realistic about it, and also conveying to the public what the needs actually are for the funding. Being as part of their function was to communicate these to the public.
So, in picking up on that, one of the follow-up items, because they had recommended that the DPW budget request, which was about $4.1 million, essentially be funded at 50%, so somewhere around $2 million. They suggested that it would be appropriate for them to wait until our work was done with respect to the transportation study.
The town manager actually was the one who said maybe that, and I believe that it was the town manager had asked, I mean, this is an interesting thing, money, you know, we talk about money, and the process is something I'm learning about. I'm not a municipal finance expert, but I believe the town manager asked the departments to submit their request. And then the new finance director, together with a newly hired assistant, went over these and cut things to meet guidelines in total of the presented by the FinCom. And then that has to go back to the individual departments, maybe for further negotiation and for them to figure what individual things they cut. So, but obviously, something matters to the public, matters to the FinCom, trying to keep us financially strong, but there are important needs.
And I did want to reiterate something that Mark.
Let's hit the road.
All right. You and me,
That's
Ellen,
thematic.
we're out of
That's
here.
then thematically appropriate, I think.
Yes, that is.
My impression of the conversation was that there really wasn't a clear understanding, and there really wasn't any discussion of the impact on the infrastructure of continuing to kick the can down the road. I think they kind of understood that there was an issue, but again, this is my impression of the comments that were made by the various members. There wasn't a real understanding of the cause and effect of, you know, what the baseline was today and what it meant to continually underfund the DPW budget with respect to the deterioration of the infrastructure. I do know that there was a discussion, I believe with the town engineer at a different finance committee meeting, in which the town engineer and the DPW director presented their 5-year plan, and discussed the, pavement condition issue, pavement condition index issue. But again, my impression was that that was not something that the members really got. And so I think it would probably behoove both the DPW and again, this is now my recommendation, is that it would behoove us and the Board of Public Works and the DPW to be continually proactive to try to educate the committee about what it actually means to continually underfund this and what, kicking the can down may mean in terms of future costs. There was one other thing that came out of the conversation, and that was that there was some interest in bonding some of the costs of doing the infrastructure work. And again, that was put off. It was mentioned as a possibility, but there wasn't any in-depth discussion or initiative to do that in this for this town meeting. So that would be for presumably a subsequent town meeting.
Did you either of you identify any next steps that you think that we should take?
Nothing specific, but I do think we should continue to follow FinCom discussions that relate to transportation and infrastructure for transportation. I think it was good, even though in a way it was after the fact, after the asks had been reduced by the finance director of the town and the town manager. I think it's important to keep this in the public eye. I think that's what we need to do, is to keep the finance. Do you agree?
Yeah.
If I could, from what you're reporting, it sounds like what the finance committee and others in town government are hearing about the long-term impact of underfunding doesn't have sufficient credibility. That they need something more definitive in terms of proving that underfunding road maintenance is going to be disastrous in a few years. Now, it may well be that nobody inside the town has that credibility just because they're proposing a budget that's their own budget, or they're on a committee that's, advocating for transportation. And maybe the use of the outside consultant would be helpful in terms of the study that's being done, which is the next agenda topic, or one of the future agenda topics here, which is someone outside helping us quantify the impact of underfunding in a way that's credible with a finance committee and a finance director.
And if I may, a very important next step is March 7th. If members of TAC go to that public hearing and repeat the excellent words that Phil and Mark said, I think you're starting to get some traction. It's just you're competing against so many other financial needs. Excuse me. And bring that PCI graph, or have Alan or Steve show it, because that's your credibility to show how much more it will cost in the future.
All right, so we've got March 7th as a public hearing, and we will meet before then, so we can talk at that next meeting. Would somebody like to? Oh, can you hear okay?
Other towns in our little world here that have similar meetings to you and are dealing with some of these same
Well,
issues?
the answer is certainly yes, but I will take public questions at the end of
Okay.
our discussion.
Okay.
Sorry, Terry is our select board liaison, which is why she jumped in there. So we have the March 7th public hearing. I know that you guys sort of drafted something to say. Would you, and we talked about you guys updating
Yeah, I
it
think
sort of
we'll
in response.
try to attend, one or both of us.
Yeah,
At least.
okay.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to point out, there are other very important infrastructure items like culverts
Yes,
and bridges
Yeah.
and things like that, that are not just road surface. And you lose, in this town, you lose a bridge or two.
And
it
you're cut
totally-
off.
You cut off, emergency services, also utilities are in roads, so, it's a kind of a dangerous game
yes.
not to maintain these.
And I'll say there was a real world example of that. I think it was last week or might have been the week before that.
Mhm.
When after a rainstorm, there was so much water passing under the bridge under the Sudbury River
Mhm.
at Muscataquit Road, that bridge got closed down. And the state people came in and had to do an inspection of the bridge, and they literally stopped vehicle traffic from crossing that bridge. So this is exactly what we're talking about now. And so, fortunately, I don't think there was any public safety issue that came up as a result of that bridge closing, but that's an example of what you're talking about.
These should not, maintenance of these should not be taken for granted.
Right.
It's very important.
I'm not sure exactly what we would be asking Stantec for, but maybe we can indicate in our response to Steve Dukran and his memo that we'd like to have sort of a collaborative conversation with Stantec about perhaps what other towns have done in terms of creating a sustainable financial plan for maintaining their infrastructure. The only thing that I did want to say is that I'm concerned that the comments were, well, we should wait for the results of the comprehensive transportation and mobility study before we fund the maintenance of our existing infrastructure. It would be one thing if they were pausing on, giving funds to major road reconstruction projects where we're redesigning intersections, but we are talking about filling potholes and maintaining the sidewalk infrastructure. And we don't need to wait to the end of the study to say that better sidewalks are necessary for maintaining the sidewalks that we already have is necessary for having better transportation and mobility options within the town of Concord. I would hope that I'm not alone in believing that, but I wonder if we may want to say something to that effect.
Yeah.
There's a recording of the FinCom meeting, people want to watch it. And, Phil and I spoke at the very beginning. And they did not need to respond to us, and they did not respond to us, but in the course of the meeting, various things came out. And my recollection is that soon after we spoke, the chair, I believe, did ask the town manager if we, something along the lines, I don't remember exactly, if $2 million that's needed is cut this year, does that mean it's added next year? Which indicates, I think, that there is some awareness of the cost of kicking things down the road, or at least at minimally that it's a need, and sooner or later you got to do it. I think that road condition graph shows that kicking it down the road is very costly. It gets increasingly costly. What came up that Phil referred to about waiting for results of the transportation study, I think that that was a statement by the town manager in response to that sort of question from the FinCom about what's the impact of delaying these needed expenditures. So it's a little complicated. I mean, it was a back and forth. but again, we have I agree with what you said, Laura. I think um, we need to point out certain things that are needs. People rely on this existing infrastructure, and it's a long-term investment. And protecting your long-term investment is good, responsible, management. So anyway, all the obvious things, but I agree with what, Nick said, that, if together with the town engineer and public works, the consultant can, as one of their actions, better develop something more convincing for the town management and the FinCom, that this is actually the way to save money.
Yeah, it seems to me that maybe there's a simple question you ask the consultant, which is, what's the optimal investment rate and maintenance that minimizes long-term, devastation? It's something, in my mind, there's some sort of a curve that says if you invest in maintenance at this rate, you save money long-term. There's an optimal investment per year, or an optimal PCI level to be at. And maybe that's it, the optimal PCI level to be at that minimizes the likelihood of, major problems down the road.
Yeah, I think the town engineer specifically has been implementing these maintenance plans, and that's probably something that he would appreciate, the consultant's support. And
Yeah, I think it's got to be tied to the PCI. That's the one thing we keep bringing up, right? And
Yes.
all we have at the moment is we can compare our PCI to other towns, but we don't know if they're over-investing or we're under-investing. And, it seems that there must be some level of PCI maintenance that assures that you aren't creating real problems later.
All right, well, how about, I think unless there's any other pieces to discuss here, let's put a pin in this and we can talk about how we incorporate this spending and funding issue into our letter to Steve Dukran and the consultants. Does that sound like a good plan of action here?
sounds good.
Okay. So there's no decision on this particular topic today. We don't have a next step, except that Mark and Phil will prepare to speak at March 7th, and we'll make sure to revisit this topic before then. So the next item on our agenda is local public transit services. This is a follow-up on from our conversation at our last meeting. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to get to the comprehensive transportation and mobility study, but I wanted to ask, I believe, Nick, you were going to draft
Right.
us, and I was wondering if you had any updates on that.
I did. I drafted up something. I didn't share it. I wanted to spend a little time thinking about it, and had a small conversation with Mark about it and got some feedback on it. So I'd like to reorganize what I did and bring it to the committee for the next meeting. And maybe we'll be able to do it in time to get it on the website for people to look at. But one of the thoughts that came up in our discussion about it was that the issue of parking keeps coming up, and we're talking about a vision for transit, but the town needs a vision at the same time for parking. There's a lot of different things said about parking and a lot of different actions the town has taken, some of which make no sense to me. And it all has to be tied together, and that's a really serious issue. But that's all I want to say about it. I don't want to have any discussion about it because it's not really, we don't have anything to present. Okay, next meeting.
Okay, so Nick, if you want to send your draft of the document to me ahead of time so that I can include it in our meeting packet for the next conversation, that would be great.
Yeah, that's the goal. I'm pretty sure I can do that. So don't see a problem.
I'm gonna fold the rest of our conversation on local public transit into our next agenda item, which is on the comprehensive transportation and mobility plan. Because there were a number of things that we flagged at during our last conversation that we wanted to ask Stantec about. We wanted to ask them about market research, cost estimates, and an operational funding plan. So these could be sub-bullets under, anyway, we'll get to that in a second. All right, so we will kick the can down the road on that particular conversation on public transit. The vision for service, which is what Nick was working on specifically, the vision for what would it look like, the service type, an outline for a route map, etc. Okay, so the next topic on our agenda is the comprehensive transportation and mobility study. We have the results of the survey, and we already had the results of the public meeting, and we've had several conversations about this with members of the public and amongst the committee members in our public meetings. So this is sort of our roundup. Let's talk about what we've learned so far. Let's talk about what we have identified we need to get out of the study based on our public outreach, any action steps that we need to continue taking. We did get a memo from Steve Dukrin, which I will just put up on the screen here so everybody can take a look at. I meant to print some copies of it, but my printer was not cooperating with me, so
Yeah.
I just.
I think you did.
All right, so it was a very short memo from Steve Dukrin, who is the project manager for the study. So this is just telling us that 25% of the budget has been expended so far. We have 75% of our $100,000 budget left. So we have $75,000 left in our contract with Stantec. And so this was Steve Dukrin and the town staff asking the TAC to review the data that's been collected and deliver written feedback to him so that sharing our insights and our understanding of the community priorities to help shape the remainder of the study. So just as a reminder, I'm going to stop sharing here for a second. The process for this study was to do public outreach and then to sort of regroup and define, okay, what specifically do we need out of the study? What are the top priorities? I feel like the word comprehensive in the study is a sort of dangerous word because obviously no study can be entirely comprehensive on something that is as complicated as transportation for a whole community. So we have to prioritize and say, okay, what are the specific deliverables that we need to get out of the study that we are asking Stantec for? So that is the focus of our conversation. My hope is that we can at least get a draft of what we would like to share with the town staff, our reflections and the deliverables that we're hoping for. And I also want to put up on the screen here, and I will put this up on the screen and leave it up, is I drafted, since drafting a whole document in a meeting is a nightmare, I wanted to give us a starting point with a few deliverables that I think might be things that we would want to ask for as the TAC. And this is informed by our conversations in our previous meetings. Again, I meant to print out some copies for those of you who are in here. So I'm just going to leave this up there.
To clarify this.
Yeah.
You're presenting this as a memo, but this has not been sent to any people that are mentioned at the top, right?
This is a draft document.
Okay.
This has
I'd
not been
suggest in the
sent to anyone.
To avoid confusion, I suggest in the future that you not put the names of addressees on such a thing, since it implies that it's gone out to people when you see this, okay?
Okay, thank you. I will make that clear in the future, Nick. But before we get to, I am gonna leave this up so that folks can read this. It is multiple pages, but I wanna just first have everybody go around and share some of the highlights that they have identified from this first phase of the study, and any particular insights that they felt were that they wanted to share in this space. I think that the thing that I would want to share is that I printed this chart out from, this is part of the results of the study. And that was included in our meeting packet from our last meeting. But the thing that I thought was so encouraging about this data is this says, how likely would you be to drive less if there were other transportation options available? And more than 50% of people that said that they were very likely to drive less if there were other transportation options available. So I thought that was a very clear and encouraging sign that folks are looking for more choices in their mobility options, and this is our opportunity to deliver that. So that was the thing I wanted to start with, but then I want to let all of our committee members go around and share any insights or highlights.
I have one copy I can pass around.
Oh,
for
of
the
this.
public. Yeah, if you wanna, this is Laura's, your first draft.
Oh,
Um,
thanks for putting that out, Mark.
yeah, well, I put it into. But no, I think that, I mean, I myself, with regard to, response to Stephen's memo, I want, to point out a couple of things. One is, it specifically is asking us to, process through our, lens, the, study results, summarized by Stantec, and not only summarized, I think there are, we have a list of specific comments and locations and things like that. And I would like more time in order to further process what we've gotten from Stantec. It's quite a bit, combining it with what we already know, other knowledge we have, et cetera. And be very focused in what directions we give to Engineer Dukran, not talking about things aspirationally, but trying to be very specific in terms of things that they make sense to us and the TAC members, and they also have some support that we see in terms of community priority, because for one thing, that's going to, address perceived needs, and it's also going to hopefully get financial support or whatever, is needed to actually implement, rather than just say, well, we have this aspiration. I completely agree with you that there's a couple of encouraging things in terms of options to reduce automobile use. One is that, like you say, a lot of people said if they had other options, they would use them sometimes. The other thing I noted is that a lot of people use automobiles. And a lot of people use automobiles, one person in a car. So the starting place is not where we want to be, but it means we can make a big change potentially.
Can you refine sort of what you're thinking in terms of what kinds of directions we want to give Stantec? Because, I've read through the comments. We collected an enormous amount of data from folks through the survey and through the public engagement process. But is your proposal that the TAC direct suggest particular projects out of those that
No.
are identified? Like what specifically are you hoping to sort of
Well,
assemble?
I think that the way I think about it is that I believe there are certain important initiatives that may have challenges in terms of accomplishing, good results. So for example, public transportation. We talked at an earlier meeting about trying to understand the funding of public transportation in a town like this. And you had pointed out that we have documentation of funding in some adjacent towns. But you know, each of those sets of information would be in a different format. There's also this question about regional associations, you know, RTAs and things like that. And one, I guess what I would say we could help provide to Steve Dukran to kind of work through with staff, the more of the way to communicate this to the Stantec and what specific deliverables related to it would be possible and would be helpful to the town in terms of some of these focused issues like public transit, okay, would be one thing. When I looked at your draft, I didn't think, I agreed with the item 2 and the item 3, which is the, 3 is the public transit. I forget which one was number 2. Maybe you can remind me.
2 was identifying priority construction and maintenance projects.
Okay, yeah, kind of, you know, and it was actually going, I also like the idea of going back over that list of 50 projects that had been, you know, created by a previous study. I find it interesting that there are certain things, you know, you hire a consultant and you say, give us this list of projects, they're going to miss some things. I think it's very interesting what might have been missed there. Like the old Stowe Road thing is an interesting thing that's missed there. There's some evolving interesting things like the prison being closed down, some more dense construction near, you know, Baker Avenue, et cetera. So there's some important ways to kind of update that list of general priorities, not, you know, focusing on, we can't expect to get design plans and precise budgets, but I think certain things are going to kind of float up to the top, and identifying those, I think, is important. As far as the complete streets thing, the number 1, I have a lot of problems with asking consultant to tell us how to do complete streets, because number 1, I think that recently in the academic literature and other things, people are questioning whether complete streets when it actually happens in municipalities delivers what it's supposed to deliver. Any kind of you know, it's a noble goal to say we serve everybody, but somebody gets preference. And I mean, I could quote a few articles. Somebody looked at 130 different cases in the US and said that there was a lot missing from the project in terms of delivering what it was supposed to deliver. Somebody wrote a book called Incomplete Streets about if you don't take into account the actual social and local conditions, it can actually make things less beneficial to the public. So I think Stantec, being construction firm, is not the place to tell us how to implement complete streets in this town. So I couldn't sign on to anything that gave them sort of a free hand in doing that, because I don't think we would get something that's good for Concord. But the goal I agree with is that we have to not prioritize automobiles. We need to prioritize everything else. That's more beneficial to the climate and more beneficial to social interaction. I had a conversation with Nick, and he pointed out a very interesting thing. I thought it was very, very significant that, you know, MassDOT and these people talk about roads, but in the town, in the locality, in the business district or the neighborhoods, you have streets. And the notion of just looking at it as how to get from A to B as fast as possible versus how things really work, say in business districts or areas with cultural resources and things like that. I think that is something that has dropped out of the complete streets view. In Boston, there was a huge outcry because there was talk about cutting down hundreds of trees in an area that was starved for trees in order to put in more paved infrastructure. And so I think the problem with the complete streets concept is that it's a part of something, but it misses a big part of what really is needed for the community. So I'd be careful about giving Stantec free hand with that. I don't think we'll get what we want.
Well, I do want to just, I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with have you read the Complete Streets policy for the town of
Well,
Concord?
I have, yes.
And I think that one of the things about Complete Streets is there's and Mariana, I actually would love to tap your knowledge on this because I know that you have a lot of information on this. But Complete Streets is a very customizable framework. Complete Streets does not say you have to have a green painted bike lane and those streets have to be this wide and the sidewalks have to, it is not a one size fits all approach. The idea of Complete Streets is taking a focused look at your pedestrian and cycling network, deciding as a community what are the context appropriate treatments for people in your community who are walking, people in your community who are cycling, and having a design manual that is customized to your particular community, and then having policies that say, when these things happen, we're going to apply these treatments. And when these things happen, we're going to apply these treatments. And those can be things like bump outs. It can be things like wider sidewalks. It doesn't have to have, there doesn't have to be a single bike lane within the town of Concord. And I think that is one of the failures of Complete Streets, in that it can be whatever we want it to be, and it could be nothing. And at the moment, our Complete Streets policy is relatively vague. It doesn't say, we don't have a design guideline that's associated with it beyond what's, was already established within the town before we adopted a Complete Streets policy. So I wanted to, I think that the problem with Complete Streets is that it's often lip service, and it doesn't have to be, though. And there are communities that have been successful with a Complete Streets policy. And the last thing that I'll say, and then I know that Nick has his hand up, and I also want to tap Mariana for this because I know you have expertise in this field, is that Stantec has been working with the National Coalition on Complete Streets to come up with not a particular rubric for how do you design sidewalks in your community, how do you design bike lanes in your community, but how do you write a Complete Streets policy that is customized to the unique needs of your community? And I would encourage everyone to look at the Complete Streets policy framework, which is provided by the National Coalition. On the National Complete Streets Coalition is their appropriate name. And this was just published in April of this year. And if you evaluate our Complete Streets policy against this framework, you will see that we are missing very large sections of things, like we don't have design guidelines that we've adopted through our Complete Streets policy. We don't mention underserved communities. We don't reference our zoning policies within the town. Our policy is very general and vague, very like Gen 1 of what Complete Streets was when it was first launched.
Right.
So
So,
I'm going to give you.
so
Before
let's,
before you move on, could you just repeat the organization that published that, please?
It is the National Complete Streets Coalition, and it's in partnership with Smart Growth America,
Okay.
which is a
And
nonprofit.
My ask is that after the meeting, if you could send a link to members of the committee so we can get access to that relatively.
Sure.
Thank you.
so one of the last few things you said there, coming up with a Complete Streets thing that actually would work for the town is extremely complicated. And the problem is that it requires bringing to the table departments, committees that don't work together right now. For instance, zoning, planning board, lots of others, right? I think it's silly to ask a consultant to go off and make that happen when the town itself isn't making that happen, right? In order to do something of the quality that we would like and that you're suggesting is possible, Laura, there's a process that needs to be laid out about how the town is going to figure out what it wants to do, right? You can't ask a consultant to tell the town what to do. So, in the short run, I think maybe the thing that would be most helpful is maybe some guidance for the engineering department on what are sensible ways of doing crosswalks in town, what works in historic districts and what works elsewhere. Very specific guidelines that will help the engineering department in the short run do some things that will make the roadways better for everybody. And maybe that's the most practical thing in the short run, is to try to make the roadways just a little bit better for everybody. Okay? And I'm really concerned that I don't know how in a town as complicated, Concord may not be a city, but it's a very complicated place in terms of the road network. We have all the roads more or less flowing into two centers, which makes traffic extremely difficult. We have roads that have no possibility of adding sidewalks or bicycle lanes to them, such as Monument Street, that are very heavily traveled. And, we have downtown areas, and it's just, it isn't an easy thing to come up with some sort of a complete streets framework that's going to be generally applicable in the town of Concord. So I'm really cautious about what we might ask a consultant to do and what their involvement would be. Beyond just some simple things about, give us advice, you have a broader view than we do about what sort of crosswalks work best in what circumstances. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with what Nick is saying. I think that broad policies are not going to help us because there are so many specific instances in town and so many, as Nick mentioned, so many committees and groups and entities that have maybe different interests or different views. I want to point out a couple things. Somebody in 2014 published a book called
Mark-
Incomplete Streets.
Mark, I did want to give Mariana a chance.
Oh,
to
yeah, sure. Let
respond.
Mariana talk first.
Thanks. Hi. So I haven't had a chance to review the previous meeting where I believe we went through the results of the study. So I'm still looking through that and catching up.
We did not go through the results of the study. That was part of what,
Oh, okay.
what we hoped to do today. So you're not behind.
Oh, awesome. Great. And so I'm looking at, is this the latest town policy on complete streets? This is dated 2018 and it's a 6-page memo.
Correct.
Okay. So yeah, I totally agree that this needs to be, I think it should be something much more specific and it should be kind of a mix of planning and design. And maybe it does need to have specific examples and specific, on a street like Monument Street, here's what we could do, and kind of incorporate more of those design and engineering standards that we've talked about before. And I do think Stantec has, I think within that company, they do a good job of combining kind of design and planning, and they have both of those strengths, assuming that the team we're working with is tapped in with all of those different kind of departments. And I think we've talked also before about looking at what the city of Cambridge has done, and they have kind of similar spatial and historic challenges, and have still become a leader in bike infrastructure and safe streets, despite those challenges. So we know it can be done. It'd be great to see this updated in kind of a nice, specific and detailed way. And looking at the recent redevelopment of the streetscape on Commonwealth Ave in West Concord Village, that was completely repaved and dug up. And I haven't looked closely at the construction details, so there may be, elements of green infrastructure there that aren't visible to the naked eye, but I think, that's an example of something that we might have liked to see a green bike lane coming through there and more trees, and maybe a little bit more permeability. So seeing a big project like that happen without those elements incorporated is kind of a very visible reminder that this is kind of overdue to catch up on. So I totally agree, Laura, with your first draft and those points about moving towards a better complete streets policy, and maybe that does need to be coming more from the committee and not from the consultant in terms of how that incorporates different town committees and departments. So as we kind of synthesize the output from this, the output from the Stantec study, I think a couple of big questions are like, how do we talked a little bit about pricing different types of projects. How do we take this giant list of suggestions and, start putting order of magnitude costs on different things in order to prioritize what's the most important, but also what's the most reasonable, and maybe, a few of the big ticket items are just not even possible right now, or, like the Route 2 reconstruct, the rotary reconstruction and stuff. I know that's not necessarily town scope. But kind of going from there with those different items. So it'd be interesting to get into that.
Thanks, Mariana. I did want to point out I want to be clear about why I sort of highlighted complete streets at the top. There aren't a lot of frameworks. There is, to my knowledge, and Mariana and others can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no other framework in municipal planning that creates a policy that says, okay, we want to accommodate walkers and cyclists and cars on our road. We need to have a policy that guides our choices about that helps the town move in a strategic and comprehensive way towards creating interconnected, safe networks. This is the state policy. This is the framework that we can use to get what people have asked for, which is better and more interconnected sidewalks, safer places for cycling. There needs to be a framework for advocating for that, for not even advocating for it, but for framing the way that we make decisions in the town. And there were a number of things within the RFP that I went back to the RFP as my first step when I was drafting this, to look at what did we specifically ask for, because this committee shaped the RFP. And the thing that we asked for was,
excuse me, we didn't shape the RFP.
we
had very little input, especially in what became an RFP from an RFQ.
okay. But the things that there are many things in here
Maybe
that
you did, but we didn't.
No. Nick was the chair at the time, so I think I have as much information as you did from, well.
Anyway,
Yeah, but the thing is
went by
that there have been a number of things that are in this RFP that we've talked about many times. Creation of best practices, design manual, or set of guidelines for creating complete streets in line with the state specifications and customized. I don't need to read the whole thing, but the manual should specify a list of design elements that are recommended and not recommended in town. And we've talked about that over and over. Should we have raised crosswalks? Should we not have raised crosswalks? Should we daylight our intersections? Should we not daylight our intersections? That is the place where we have those guidelines spelled out. It's supposed to be in a complete streets policy. And right now we have no design guidelines in our complete streets policy. And then the other thing that we've talked about many times is we need a way to have a transparent process for evaluating requests from major major transportation investments from the community, and transparently scoring them, having some way of prioritizing them that's not just like, well, this person asked over and over and over and over again, and so we're going to do it, even though it maybe doesn't have the greatest community benefit, even if it's not necessarily helping create connectivity. Like, we need to have something that guides the town, so we don't end up with the same thing that we had last time, which is we have a list of complete streets priority projects, and nobody can articulate why number 5 is number 5 and not number 25. So a scoring rubric that would give us give the town some framework for evaluating, should Old Stowe Road be the first thing on the list, or should it be the crosswalk at Church Street? You know, we need to have some way of transparently communicating to the community that your request has been understood, discussed, evaluated, and here's why it scores this way. Go ahead, Phil.
So I have a rhetorical question. And that is, when the first Complete Streets priority list was developed, some information was put into the process, and the result of that information being digested and worked on was the priority list. I've never been able to get any information from anyone in the town. And as far as I know, no one from the town has pressed the prior consultant to provide the raw information for the first go around. So I think one of the elements of doing the task that you're talking about is to see how it was done the first time. And that may require the staff to go back to the consultant who did the work the first time and request that information and not take no for an answer. Because my sense is that no has been said and we paid for that, we should have it. It's our property.
Phil, are you talking about the prioritized list or about the policy?
Yeah, about the prioritized list.
Prioritized list was not done by the consultant. It was done by someone, by people in the town, by town employees.
Well, we
Through a
need to-
process that was not public.
Right, we need, whoever actually.
They don't work here anymore, Phil.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter whether they work here.
There
The
might be an
documents,
archive.
there might be an archive, right? Their emails, their memos, all of that is, somewhere, and it's not in. the
Why
public.
does it matter? I don't get why it matters.
Because I think that it's helpful to understand what the rationale was, and, when part of learning to do things is to learn where the mistakes were made, and, to both correct mistakes and to do things better the next time. That's the first thing.
Phil,
So-
I think we know what some of the mistakes were, and I don't think we should spend a lot of money trying to figure out any more, but some of the mistakes were one group came from a neighborhood and complained, so their project got moved up. Another mistake was the gas company was going to redo work on Hubbard Street. So they said, all right, we're tearing up Hubbard Street anyway. Let's put that first. So I'm not sure if those are mistakes, but it's more like what Laura's saying, that we should have a scoring rubric. We think we know how to do it right, and the consultant knows how to do it right. So going back and trying to figure out how we did it wrong might be a waste of time and money.
So I'll agree to respectfully disagree with you on that point.
Yeah.
So I'll just move on. The second thing is, I think I agree that having a transparent scoring for prioritizing projects is a good idea. I also think that if we can ask the consultant what other practices have been successful in terms of implementation of the policy as it's been adopted, would be helpful. So Mariana suggested that the city of Cambridge was a good example of how the policy that they developed was actually implemented. I think perhaps the consultant can provide us with some suggestions or some recommendations regarding what else it takes. So we've all discussed the fact that the boards act independently. They don't talk with one another necessarily. There isn't a centralized means of boards communicating with one another. So maybe that's something that would be part of this process. Maybe institutionalizing training for all of our staff people so that they understand what this process might be. Maybe that's how these projects are successful. Because I can tell you that one thing that my impression is that the idea of the Complete Streets money that was provided was that it was simply a way of, providing money to do already conceived projects as opposed to implementing a policy. And I'm not sure whether that would be true today because we have a whole different set of staff people involved. But I think it would be helpful for the staff to all understand the idea that we're talking about. I mean, we can talk about this as volunteers, but if the staff don't buy into this,
Yeah.
it's not going to make any difference in terms of their work plan. And then my suggestion is, and maybe Terry can give us some information about this, or maybe we're going to have to ask Megan about this, but unless we have a way of bringing our ideas into the work plans of the staff people, they won't work on it. So, I've discovered in doing this volunteer work that there's a disconnect between our recommendations and what the staff is tasked with doing as part of their goals and objectives in their jobs. And without having the leadership of each of the divisions, Department of Public Works, the school transportation people, and the police department saying to their staff people, this is part of your job description now. This is what you are supposed to do. Nothing's going to happen because the staff they're already overburdened, right? Unless it's incorporated. Sorry,
Yeah,
it's not
Yeah,
gonna work.
Phil, you're absolutely right. And I just want to mention that Megan is a really good contact person because she is working now on getting the two silos, at least of Public Works and Planning Zoning, to work together. And that's a really big one in transportation. So at least you should be working with Megan on that.
So I do want to just pull this all back for a second, because I think maybe it might have been my mistake in drafting something
It's a draft.
before we had a full conversation. Because I just want to put in front of us again, we have $75,000. We
Yes.
cannot get everything.
Right.
We cannot, and we do not want to give the consultants pointless busy work. Nor do we want to give our staff pointless busy work. Our task today is to say, this is what we learned in phase one, and this is what we as a community need to get out of it. Now, maybe the Complete Streets framework is not resonating for you, although I will encourage everyone as homework, all committee members as homework, to go home and print out the Complete Streets policy and read it, and then read through this 10-element framework that was prepared by Stantec for the Coalition on Complete Streets. I think that it will be eye-opening to see all the things that we are missing and why we're not, I think that the problem with our Complete Streets policy is that it was written so that we would qualify for a grant program. It was not written to fundamentally change the way that we consider transportation investments within the town of Concord.
We are not making the transportation investments in town.
Right. And
Even the ones that are an existing infrastructure, we're way the other side.
Right.
so
Yes.
whatever we call it, let's say we don't even call it our Complete Streets policy. We need to have a policy and an implementation plan for how do we create walking and cycling and public transit within the town of Concord.
Okay, so can I
And
just?
so
And
how-
driving,
what-
and
what-
driving, and driving.
And alongside driving, yes.
Okay,
but-
listen, the charge you read off for the project, for the consultant, actually had a bunch of good stuff in it. And I think part of the problem is it rambled on too long. Okay, it became, the more you read it, the less focused it became. So I just think going back over that charge and narrowing it down to what Steve Dukran is looking for is what our task should be right now. Okay, because there were good words you read off when you read that section.
I'm gonna pull up the charge so that everybody
Can I
can
say
see it.
something? about-
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so, yeah, I think Steve is helping us by asking us to kind of focus on what, as Phil was saying, that the staff can use and can understand. So a couple of things quick. One thing is, in your draft and based on Steve's request, and based on what I saw on the survey results, one of the most popular places to place flags was at the Route 2 Rotary. We've had long time discussions about Route 2 crossings. And one of the things that we should potentially suggest that Steve could ask the consultant to do would be based on their experience working with MassDOT, and MassDOT has a subdivision called the MBTA, things that are not directly under town's control and where they do things very secretly and very slowly. How can the town influence what actually happens at the Rotary, what happens on Route 2? How can we prepare our needs and inputs rather than wait until MassDOT has a design plan already made and has one public meeting and says, you know, we heard what you said, but we're gonna do it anyway. I think that's one of the things where Stantec ought to be help us, you know what I mean? So, I mean, they work for MassDOT, right? I mean, they probably do things. I also want to just put in the record, there's a book called Incomplete Streets. And one of the interesting things it's saying, when important social and symbolic narratives, and God knows we have those in Concord, are missing from the discourse and practice of complete streets, what actually results are incomplete streets. And there is an article in 2019 International Journal of Sustainable Transportation, where they reviewed 113 municipal level complete streets from the National Complete Streets Coalition database and concluded that most municipal complete streets policies do not guide the negotiation of trade-offs between users within the street right-of-way, let alone other infrastructure things under the road and other aspects. The policies are broad and defer to idealistic goals of safely accommodating all user types equally without recognizing the implicit hierarchy of accommodation. If you change a street to a walking only wonderful place for people to walk, you're taking bicycles out, you're taking cars out. If you put bike lanes in certain places, you're making it more dangerous for pedestrians. You know, we have very specific conditions. I would be very cautious about thinking that a consultant could design for us a computer program algorithm that will relieve any of the committees in town of their responsibility. I think this is our responsibility to try to pull, tough as it is, to try to pull together all the other committees and things in terms of this. We're doing a little bit with the FinCom, just a little baby step. I think we have to, it's going to be a long thing, but I do agree with everything you said, Laura, about all the specific design mechanisms that are available, all the tools, all the, you know, the puzzle pieces. But I don't think Stantec can tell us how to put the puzzle together. They can say, there's all these pieces.
So, quick question for you, Mark.
Yes,
The name of the author of the book, please.
the name of the author of the book, that's a damn good question. It's an edit, I'm gonna I can print this out again. I'll give you the,
And if you can print out the article, or rather send us a link. to
I'll
the
send you links. Why don't I send you the 2 links?
That would be
That
great.
would be great.
And
And
send
again,
them
we
to,
can
Send
send
it
to
to me,
Laura.
and I'll
Because,
make
you
sure
know,
that they go onto the
a better,
resources.
I mean, these things evolve over time. I'm very suspicious as an engineer of slogans that seem to mean something, but mean different things to different people. That's what I'm worried
And
about.
I do want to be clear,
Yeah, when the
I
select
agree
board
with,
adopts a policy, there are policies they've adopted 20, 30 years ago, they've done nothing. And we want something to happen. That's what I'm worried about.
yes, so
Policies are
my question,
not always, you know, was the Civil Rights Act?
So I do want to be clear. I agree
that's
with
a
you
lot,
that
not opposed.
recognizing the hierarchy of
Not
recognizing the hierarchy of needs on a street is something that we need to do. And there are lots of places where
And
we're gonna,
how many owners are there? Quote unquote. Historic Commission, the zoning
Oh,
board of
yes.
appeals, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. right?
but this is, I do want to
Private
say, this
property.
is our opportunity. I mean, we've hired a
It's our job, I
consultant.
agree, it's our job.
We've hired a consultant to help do the work.
Mhm.
Because our staff does not have enough time and capacity to
So we-
do all of this
so we
work. So
gotta
we need to
what
figure
are
out,
those
what are
things
we trying to
that we
get
need,
them to
that the
do?
staff can use that they don't have time to do.
Right.
If it's nothing they can use,
So
then
it's,
it's not gonna be
and
valuable.
we said it says very clearly in here, and I'll scroll down so that we can see, like, we asked for best practice design manual. You know, we need to have that. We need to have clear guidance on what is recommended and not recommended. You know, I would argue that that's part of a complete streets policy, but let's just put it aside and say, okay, we need that thing. I would argue that we need some transparent rubric for evaluating projects, you know, based on their community value, based on whether they're going to help us accomplish a goal. You know, I think that we need some kind of a framework that's sort of holding those pieces together and giving us a vision statement of what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to accomplish a interconnected pedestrian network that reaches these important destinations? I think that we need to have a framework for that. So whether that's a complete streets policy or some other guiding plan that we're gonna ask and here's the thing is, maybe I've gotten too specific in the letter. Maybe we just need to pull it back and say that we have these particular goals and we want to work with the town to figure out exactly what pieces and deliverables we need. This was, we can scrap my whole draft and come up with a new list of things. And I just want to be clear about what we're asking for. What we think that we can get with $75,000 and a consultant who has design planning, working with MassDOT, like we have somebody at our disposal and $75,000 to spend. And the last thing that we want to do is kick the can down the road. We only have a contract for so long with them.
Mhm.
And if we extend the contract, that means more taxpayer dollars going into it. So we want to be efficient with our time and resources. So I don't want to spend 3 TAC meetings discussing, well, what should we ask for, and waste 2 months of a 12-month contract that we've already paid for, So that's what I want to get done here today, is come up with what's the next step? What are we asking?
Well, I myself want to spend a little more time looking through the survey results and try to see what really kind of rises to the top, just as, as that part of public input. I mean, it wasn't given to everybody. It wasn't filled out by everybody in town, et cetera. I think the public transportation thing rises very high, and in any way, and the maintenance thing rises very high. Any place we have multiple modes of transportation crossing or sharing, that rises very high. But I don't think there's one way to solve it, and I'm afraid in this town, it's going to have to be very hybrid. We're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. I don't know.
What,
So I guess what
I
I'm saying,
wanna
the policy will not help with the specifics.
Okay,
We will not
let's-
have a checklist that says this thing gets 85 score, this gets 35 score, so we don't have to think. We have to think. I'm gonna shut up.
Mark, I'm very happy to have you articulate what we want to get at. I'm gonna push back and say we've had the survey results for over a month.
Yes.
And we have had the information about the public forum for several months now.
Mhm.
And I don't think I mean, I know that you've read through it. So what are you hoping to get out of the comments that does reviewing the survey results for another 3 weeks? Is that going to help? Do we need to do that before we can respond to Steve's memo, is my question.
Well, that's a good question.
I
No.
don't
And
think,
Mark,
I don't
I'm
think
sorry,
so.
Nick, go ahead.
To answer your question quickly, I don't think so, because I think the whole survey process was just uncalibrated. We didn't ask the right questions to get specific answers. We just asked people what was on their mind, and it was a self-selecting group. So I don't know what the quality of that data is. It just,
So
I read through it and it causes me to ask more questions.
how
But
should we
that's-
respond to Steve?
That's really the question
That's the
here.
question.
Okay, yeah, so the way. Maybe Steve said it in his memo, but the question is, what does Steve need to do his job? Right? What he needs out of this to do his
Sorry.
job. But the point I want to make is about this whole issue of the streets and design, which is, I think the thing that gives you the most practical answers in the short run and forces you through a process to integrate all of the needs is to designate 5 streets that you think, or sections of roadways that you think are important. And to come up with it, go through the process of coming up with a design that meets the needs of the users. Right? 5 sections of road, because that'll put you in direct contact with the historical issues and the physical constraints of the layout of the road, the history. It'll all be right there. I just
So
think,
those are like cases in point, case studies, and who picks the 5?
So
I see we
just so
picked
that
the
I'm,
5.
just so that I'm clear about what you're suggesting, Nick, are you suggesting this as a planning exercise or an implementation exercise?
I'm not sure which. What I'm suggesting is if we went through this, if Stantec went through the project and they came out and we had gone through the process of figuring out, I'll always use Monument Street because I think is a really challenging one as an example, and said, here's the best way to use Monument Street, right? Here is the best way for all parties to use Monument Street because it has such severe constraints, historic constraints, physical constraints, scenic roads constraints, trees, everything. But it has needs. And, you can't get from one end of it to the other unless you're in a car. So, that's one example of a street. Another thing would just be something on Route 62. And I almost don't care what section of town, because those are heavily traveled. And, right now we've got issues like parking and, bicycles and, lots of things that are in conflict. And if you could just come up with a design to get you from Concord Center to West Concord, then I think it would force us in contact with all of the right parts of the town leadership in order to work the issues out. If we came out of the Stantec study and we just had designs for those things based, having gone through a process that gives us good answers, we will have learned a hell of a lot, and we'll have some specific designs for specific roadways that are important to the town.
So I'm trying to imagine this being a opportunity for the public to weigh in as well as the staff
Yeah.
to weigh in. I mean, it's like, let's take Monument Street for a second. If there was an opportunity, because we have scheduled another public forum in the contract.
It's not scheduled, yes,
Right.
but it's laid out in the
It's
contract.
in the
yes.
contract, right? If we were to have a public forum in which we choose Monument Street and invite the public in, as an opportunity to weigh in on how they'd like to see things, and invite representatives of the staff or other, maybe representatives of various boards to participate in the study and say, here are the design constraints, the development constraints, the environmental constraints, the stuff you have to consider when you want to do what you want to get. I think that might be a great exercise. Okay, because I think it would be helpful for the public to understand what it takes to get from 0 to 100 to, from start to finish, right? And maybe that's what part of what we recommend is something like a planning charrette where the public gets to see, this is how it's done. This is how you design a complete street. And where you can't have a complete street, for example, or you can only get 2/3 of a complete street. Is that consistent with what you're thinking about,
Yes,
Nick?
yes, yeah.
Okay, so maybe that's one concrete action that we can say to Steve, we want the consultant to set something, to prepare to set something up where the public gets involved, where the staff gets involved, everybody gets a chance to take a crack at this. And it may have to be a sequential thing, may have to be in one big meeting. I don't know. But
So the proposal is, 5 case studies.
case. is great.
Or 5 case studies, Stantec providing the design for the public to comment on at a charrette. That's the proposal.
Something like that,
Yeah,
or
Not
or
just
an
the public.
analysis, so what if,
For the public and the staff.
and the staff.
And the
And
committees.
other people who have some experience in the field
Right.
to guide the process.
You see, the problem I'm having with the discussion, with this proposal, what I like is it forces you to go through and confront very specific issues. Otherwise, we're talking on the level of generalities, and I guarantee you, I can create a deliverable that's useless to you and meets all your requirements. I guarantee.
No, I think actually Monument Street is a great test case because it starts out in the middle of the town, right, where it's,
Historic.
it's fairly densely developed, it moves directly into a national park, right? Then you get past,
It
that-
crosses a bridge that's only 18 feet wide.
it crosses a bridge, right? Then you have a school, and then you get into the rural area of town. And that's, part of the.
Right, some of which
town.
is wide and most of which is narrow and twisty.
Right, right.
Very
So you have,
interesting.
and some of which is wet and, and there's a brook and there's a culvert that failed and all the other jazz. So I think that's a good of the various places that we
okay, I
could.
think, I would say if we were able to pick 5 and have them done from, a certain high level, how Stantec would approach this, that's a interesting thing. If we were only to do one, I would not do Monument Street. I would do Route 62 between the 2 town centers. But if we can do 5 and Monument Street can be in there, I'm just thinking that Monument Street might be one of the examples where the solution is a shuttle that runs every half an hour.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
I
That's
think we
a-
need to- I
that's
think it
a
needs to be
great
one. I
point.
think we can do multiple.
That's a great point. I would say a downtown thing as you're suggesting, Mark, and something like Monument Street or something much like it. But it's true, Monument Street has such constraints, it almost forces you into a bus or a on-call transit service.
Or a subway.
Yeah.
Under the river.
Talk about expensive.
So,
I do want to control the time here because we are only here until 12 today. So, I think Mariana, do we still have Mariana?
Yes.
do we lose her?
Just muted. Muted.
I just want to make some space for Mariana to respond to this. But I will say, it sounds like there is consensus on this idea. And I agree. I love case studies. I love specificity. I would love to get something really tangible out of this study. I hope we're all in agreement on that.
Move us forward, I think.
The thing that I think is important, though, is that we've called this the Comprehensive Transportation and Mobility Study. So we need to get we need to have a process for applying the learnings of those case studies broadly throughout the town. So if that's a policy,
Yeah.
if that's we just, like,
Learnings,
it can't just
learnings.
be, we've got 5 case studies.
Learnings.
So-
So one of the deliverables is the learnings that you get from the exercise.
Right. And I think that the design guidelines can come out of that because we will be exploring lots of different design options within the context of those things. I do want to come back and say that I do feel like we need to have some way of transparently evaluating and selecting projects generally within the town and for this, because we can't just say, well, we're going to pick Monument Street because we think it's a good idea.
But that-
That
but-
needs.
The priorities are the town's issues. There's nothing the consultant can do to help you with priorities, right? What are they gonna do? The question, it's our priorities.
They can help us come up with a process for applying the same, okay, so we've asked these people, we have information from, we need to have a process for evaluating a project. It can't just be like, well, Nick lives on Monument Street and he feels this way, and we need to have some other criteria for evaluating potential projects for
Agreed.
spending $75,000 on, there needs to be a way
Right.
to justify
Okay,
the
yes, yes.
expense of that,
Yeah, so I wonder if it's, do we have, I'm looking back at their that's the Stantec's proposal. That I'm not sure, when they sent this over. Maybe this was before I joined. But, do we have an allowance for more meetings for the committee to meet with them? Because what I'm wary of is kind of over constraining the deliverables. And maybe letting them tell us what they think that the next round of deliverables should look like, and using that as kind of the starting draft. I would be interested to see, theoretically, they've done this before. And if they can come up with kind of a first crack at what an evaluating framework looks like, that we can then customize using what we all know about the town and our needs. Because they don't know our traffic patterns and our pain points, as personally, but they do know how to evaluate, this on kind of a broader, more standardized scale. So I'd be interested, before we put too much legwork into it, to see what they have to say, and maybe we've done that and I missed a memo, but just to have a solid starting point, before we each kind of figure out what everyone thinks kind of a scoring system should be. I think it does make sense. We need some kind of a framework. We need some kind of sort of consistent, standardized way. And as someone, I'm not sure who said a few minutes ago, pointed out, the survey results were a self-selecting group of folks in the town. So we might see complaints overrepresented in one area or another. And I do think that kind of the order of magnitude cost of different improvements should play in. If something is only going to affect a certain group of people, but it's easy and inexpensive to implement, that should play in to that conversation. So it feels like maybe time to have a conversation with the consultant, and look back at what they think the next round of deliverables should be, before we kind of reinvent the wheel too much on that.
Go ahead, Phil.
Are you, just so that I'm clear, Mariana, are you suggesting that they have a conversation with Laura as the chair? Or are you suggesting that we invite them to attend the next public meeting of our committee so that we can have a conversation in the public forum?
I think what I was suggesting was that they meet with the committee, but I'm not an expert on open meeting law, so I'm not sure what's the most efficient way, and if if just
Well,
sending
I
one
think-
person to have a
I think
chat
that
with
would
them.
be best.
Steve
I don't
is-
think that one person should be in the middle of it.
Okay.
Steve
So
is their
I think
interface.
the great thing about Zoom is that, the expense, if they want to come and show up here in Concord, it's great, but otherwise they can just do it from their desk.
Nick, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Steve is the interface to them, and I would think, I don't know, it just seems like he should be the one doing it to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, a little, taking what Mariana said, I think about it a little bit differently. First of all, because it was an RFP changed from an RFQ, the consultant has already told us what they think should be done. That's what an RFP is. They propose something. So they've already weighed in on what they think should be done in the contract. Contract is something presumably written by them. That's what an RFP is. Response to an RFP was a proposal. But I think we should take advantage of the fact that it doesn't cost us any money to actually give our thoughts that we discussed today to the staff, to Steve, to discuss with all the staff, and they should filter it first to say, this idea of case studies would be valuable or not valuable, or we suggest, you know what I'm saying? I'm taking advantage of them and let them manage the consultant so that they stand between us saying, here's what we think are the goals and some ways to do it. And they say, okay, here's how we'll get Stantec to contribute to that. And here's what we already know or what we can do. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I'm afraid it will go round and round and round if we talk with the consultant. I
Is,
think
is
we
there any
should-
reason why we can't do both?
I'd rather spend the time with the staff. I mean, you pointed out, Phil, how important it is to really get the staff on the same wavelength.
Mm.
And I think that's a two-way street because they can tell us some things like, oh, you're gonna do that area? Well, what about this area? Or you're gonna look at Monument Street. You better add all these things in to make sure Stantec doesn't miss them. You know, like all the under-road infrastructure and, you know what I mean?
No, that sounds sensible to
I
me.
mean, and you can always do the consultant later, but I'm just saying, if we could grab some staff and vet this idea of, specific, you know, I mean, we don't have to write a letter ourselves and throw it over the wall to Stephen. We can say, Stephen, we want to talk to you. Can even have a specific meeting where we talk to Stephen and say, here's what we discussed. And we would like to respond to you, but we'd like to adapt it to, you know, make it a little more focused.
So I just want to be clear. So the case studies, I think we're all in agreement that that's good.
Something to
Okay,
consider, yeah.
But that's not $75,000 in a comprehensive transportation and mobility. plan.
Easily, it could be much more than that.
Easily. Could be much more, it depends
Much
what
more than that.
the level.
You're
Yeah.
talking about having design sessions and getting community and staff involved and then digesting the information and then comparing it to maybe what others done in other towns and what's worked.
Yeah, I mean, 5 sounds crazy, but 2 or 3, I mean, I don't think one is gonna, there's so much difference between Monument Street and Route 62 that
But both of those are pretty compelling when you
they
think
are,
about it.
yes, no, they cover a lot of ground and
Yeah.
they would bring up all these issues.
Right.
I would want to see if, I agree with you, Monument Street is a very interesting street and I have biked on it, so but I do think that we would want to make sure that that recommendation is grounded in, was it identified by multiple people within the study? Was it, like, I don't believe it, my recollection of looking at the maps is that that was not a hotspot. And we
I
would
don't
need
care
to
what
have-
street it is, as long as it has the characteristics and it has so many
Right.
constraints on it that
Yeah, high
it
cons-
serves
high
our
constraint.
purpose. It serves our purpose, which is to learn.
Right. Well, so I would just add to that. So we're talking about case studies. I think that maybe my letter, we can scrap it and we can say that, you know, we're really interested in specific design, specific case studies that could inform, you know, design recommendations for the town. I would add that maybe, to Mark's point, working with MassDOT and the MBTA, which is definitely something that Stantec has a lot of expertise in, is to ask the question, how do we improve connections between Concord and West Concord? Because looking at the results of the survey and the public
Mhm.
meeting and all of our meetings, that is the number one question. How do we get people safely from Concord Center to West Concord?
But that's what.
Not even just safely, but comfortably. How do we improve that connection? so
No,
more people can
effectively,
go?
I mean, that is by suggesting that stretch of road, you're doing that, right?
Right.
You're doing, that's
it
exactly
could-
what you're doing.
I mean, but we have also talked about exploring rails with trails, seeing if, you know, being able to construct a path underneath the Route 2.
The more you broaden it, the more likely it's gonna be a big failure, in my opinion. Just stay with the roads we have for this case study and not broaden it into creating new roadways. Like, you know, trying to get it onto the MBTA. I think that's a rat hole.
I just think that, I have seen in other issues in the past in Concord, which I'm not gonna name specifically, that pigeonholing ourselves into exploring one possibility can sometimes lead to.
It's not one possibility, as someone pointed, Mark pointed out. Part of the solution on 62 is, I think, very likely a bus service to get you from one center to the other, okay? I think it's a very broad thing to say, use all of the tools, all of the tools. We're not just asking you to do pavement markings. We're asking you to look at all the ways of transporting people from Concord Center to West Concord. Okay?
Yeah, and it's, people want multiple alternatives that work for multiple people, and, I mean, if there was one kind of compelling case where I wouldn't feel too bad talking about complete streets, it would be that one. I
Yeah.
just worry about buzzwords, especially when politics and money gets involved, because sometimes you end up with something you don't want.
So somebody articulate what we're asking for here.
Well, I think that, well, a couple of things. I think we've identified some, possible bullets for a response to Steve Dukran, but I think it would be helpful for a meeting with Steve Dukran. Now, I could talk to Steve and run some of this by him, or we could have him come to a meeting, or we could have a special, in the next meeting, or we could have a special meeting with him, which,
Is your proposal to not respond to the memo in a written format today?
that I propose we don't, I don't know, I think we could do better by not responding in a written format today, but kind of interacting with Steve and possibly other staff to get it very focused, because it's going to be filtered through staff to Stantec, and I worry consultants tend to take things off in their own direction, in my experience, and we want to have the reins, somebody's got to hold the reins and get them on the right track.
So I'm hearing you're saying having a dialogue with Steve first and potentially other staff people first before responding formally to Steve.
Yeah,
in an action
okay,
item.
that's
So
my
you want to run this idea by him of the case studies and find,
Yeah.
and draw out what else he's looking for.
Right, yeah,
You
I
know.
think exactly. I agree with that.
And
Okay,
I'm
so,
I'm okay with Mark just having that discussion with him. I mean, that isn't an open meeting issue. It's just him and.
I mean, I can do that anyway, but
Right.
regardless of what we do.
well,
And-
we should indicate there should be one person communicating with Steve, because we don't want it to be, we're all sort of taking
Yeah,
up his time.
But I think, I
His
mean,
time is very
there'll be a
valuable.
video of this meeting, like it was designed to watch, and there's, or to try. The other thing is, these case studies can tie into also to illustrate, policies and aid in development of policies and, like who should be involved in these decisions, proactively, et cetera, with all the different, historical and other concerns and things like that. I think.
We are coming to
focuses-
time, so I wanna really hone in on what we're doing here. I don't think that I'm just gonna state, I don't think that we have consensus about what we're asking for here, because I think it would be a really huge missed opportunity for us not to review our complete streets policy as part of the comprehensive transportation and mobility plan. But I can hear that there is not consensus on that point.
I'll say this, I fully believe that the tax should reconsider it. I'm not sure that it's a job for the consultant. And we should.
I do not think that we have adequate expertise on TAC to evaluate and update the complete streets policy without some help.
Okay.
And I
So
think,
with help, we should do, but I think it should be our responsibility with help. I don't think we can farm it out. That's my thought.
and I don't think that, I think that this may be a difference of thinking in the way that you and I are thinking about this.
Mhm.
I would never expect Stantec to write a complete streets policy and for us to adopt it.
Mhm.
I am suggesting that we use Stantec's expertise to help us draft, to bring things to a public workshop so that the public can comment on it,
Mhm.
to have it something that we can comment on and that staff can comment on. I would never suggest that a consultant who does not live here write a policy like that. I'm just suggesting that we do not have the manpower or the expertise by ourselves, and this is an opportunity for us to tell, but
Mhm. Okay.
we're
No,
going
no,
off.
I'm okay with what you're saying, but only if we anchor it to specific case studies.
I love that. I
Mhm.
love that. That's a
Okay.
wonderful refinement of what I'm asking for. So that's great. But what I'm concerned about is that, Mark, if you go to talk to Steve, I would love it if you can commit to sort of explaining that there are differences of opinion in TAC, and that these are issues that have come up. I do want to just put it in the record that I know that Steve and I have talked about the need for a design manual has come up from staff. That's why it's in the RFP. the staff has asked for a design manual, and I would hope that we as the TAC can support the staff.
Who
in
is
getting-
asked? Planning or engineering?
Steve has,
Steve, okay.
has said
Design
that a
manual.
design manual
Okay.
is an important deliverable for the staff to help them do their jobs better
By the
here.
way, it's not, it's no violation.
Mark, I'd like you to explore what that means with Steve, because a design
Okay.
manual, to me, on the one extreme, which would be unfortunate, is it's just a menu of every possible way to do a crosswalk. And that's not helpful. But, you know, crosswalks that would work within the acceptability of historic districts and, you know, to understand which ones are okay in historic districts, which ones are okay in commercial districts, how you deal with getting across Route 2 in a crosswalk. Those are very specific, helpful things.
Yeah, okay,
So-
well, that's a good point.
So I'm just gonna put up on here for a second. I just want to highlight a few things, Mark, if you're gonna go and have this conversation with Steve, because
Mhm.
I've had conversations with Steve, and I think that Steve Dukran is the town engineer.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking that
Can I
question.
point out one thing?
Just a second. So I just want to point out that transparent criteria, maybe we have a difference of opinion here. I think we need transparent criteria for evaluating projects. So if, when you're talking to Steve, I hope that you can ask if that's something that the town agrees with. And I'm gonna just
Well,
highlight them.
Anyway,
if you can look up-
I don't like that term, but go ahead, I'll write it in transparent criteria.
Whatever you want to call it. I mean, it is why I wrote this document so that we
Yeah.
would have the clarity on what we're asking for.
You mean disclosed written criteria?
Disclosed written, and the other thing that I want to just highlight here, which points to a lot of the things that have been discussed, is we need to clearly delineate the decision-making and decision-making like responsibilities and the implementation responsibilities among these many stakeholders that we've referenced today. You know, Public Works Department, the Commission on Public Works, our committee, you know, there's a variety. So those are some things that I would like to know if the staff is, you know, if we're having a back and forth discussion, those are things that I think are very important for us to get out of this study, is having some.
So, yeah, could you put a word around, so you're talking about how do transportation decisions get made in the team?
Right, a better process for us working together.
Okay.
And it is 11:54. Okay, so in terms of
Public,
in terms of this, I would like to take a minute to have public comment on this particular issue. I'm just gonna say, we're gonna push off until next time. Oh, no. Okay, I'll just take comments from the public right now on this particular issue, not on general comments in general.
Okay, so I love the idea of case studies. I would say that, one, it's been said, like, added in, but I want to make it clear, this can't just be infrastructure. It should be complete streets plus mass transit options. And I
Yes,
think
yes.
if that is included in, you know, yeah, so just want to add that in. Also, how do you select? I would say a brilliant way to do it is to include what I call use cases. So like Route 62 connecting Concord Center to West Concord, that's great. Why are people doing it? What are they trying to get to and from? And I'd say if you include Old Road Ornac at the hospital, you would get people trying to get to Emerson, to doctor's appointments, and you could ask Council on Aging. I mean, I think there's a lot of criteria around what am I trying to do? What stuff do I have to carry? Like my example of taking returnables to Crosby's and bring groceries back, so that you get more than I can do it on my bike, I can do it on my backpack, I'm walking with a backpack. Because I think that would really engage people. Why? Because the survey did the bottom up. What are the options and why am I doing it? You need to go to the why. What am I trying to accomplish and what are my options and what's the connectivity? And I think case studies, you know, that's brilliant. I think it's a really good, really will engage people. So thanks.
Quick question for you, Ellen.
Yeah.
Could you just tell us your name and your?
Oh, Ellen Quackenbush.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Phil,
Phil.
for reminding me my name, at 206 Prairie Street
Great.
Thank you.
in West Concord. Thanks.
Go ahead, you can introduce yourself.
Bob Andrews, 32 Staffordshire Lane, Concord. On this particular topic, I agree very much with what you were saying, Laura, that I would not want to depend upon an outside consultant to come up with the policy statement regarding the complete streets. I think it really needs some substantial input from people who live here and have thought about it firsthand. I can't totally not talk about the preceding issue in this meeting. There was a lot of talk about the financial impact of kicking something down the, can down the road. It's not strictly a matter of finances, what the implications are. There are human impacts from kicking the can down the road. I mean, there are impacts on health and safety. It's not healthy to hit potholes every time you drive down the street, especially if you have a spinal column that's in trouble. It's not healthy or safe if those potholes catch you by mistake, by surprise, and you lose control over your steering and hit somebody. So I'd like to see some attention to that. That's about it.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob.
Can
Oh,
I
go ahead,
just
Bernie.
throw out something very?
Can you
briefly?
introduce yourself
Bernie Jenkins.
and your address?
Where am I, the 32 Stafford Drive. I come and go. I've been sitting here and what's going through my mind is in 2007, we had a great big thing that, and it was about climate change and this and that. We had this thing and we had it at the high school and nobody knew what we were talking about. Climate change was a nothing that nobody knew about. We ended up with well over 500 people coming in and out of the high school. We worked at the high school. We had a big thing. And that was the start of a whole bunch of other things happening around the issues of climate and change. And that model might be something that you might think about.
Thank you.
So
Hold on.
Bernie, I just have a quick question for you, just so I'm clear. You're saying this was a public planning exercise
It
that
was-
happened at the high
It
school?
was with the high school, with the adult education, with people in all the town, within the town of people. It just kept growing and growing and growing. And none of us knew what the heck we were doing.
Now, was this a single event or was this a series of events?
The event itself was a Saturday that took over, there were over 500 people that came to the high school.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
but out of that came a whole bunch of other stuff.
Thank you.
And I think you need to bring people, you need to get people thinking about what it is, what the heck are you talking about? I mean,
I do have 4 folks on the computer that need to make public comments, so I do want to thank you, Bernie.
nice to think about.
All right, so I'm gonna take them in order that I see them. Cynthia Katz, if you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Great, thank you. Hi, Cynthia Katz, 20 Conant Street in West Concord. Thank you for this forum. I hope there will be more. I guess, your meeting was far-reaching, so I want to address a few things about it. One is, if we don't learn from our mistakes, and if we don't fix our mistakes, what are we thinking? So it was brought up that maybe we had some missed opportunities in Commonwealth Ave in West Concord and the sidewalks, and many people brought up trees and traffic calming and crosswalks, and it seems like it fell on deaf ears. And we have a sidewalk in front of Kenny Dunn Square in West Concord with no crosswalks to it. I also think, as we think about safety, pedestrians, walkability, access for all, I look at the ride out renovation that we did, 10 years ago? And we put in a new undulating sidewalk. There's no lighting. So when people are coming back, commuters from the train and walking along Lawsbrook Road, they can't see. And in addition to that, there's an area that floods. So when it turns to ice, nobody who isn't very able-bodied can get through there, but it hasn't been fixed. So when we do things, how do we actually reflect on what we've done and then think about, okay, let's fix this now? I think about other studies that we've done for transportation, the cut-through street study. Where'd that go? And why didn't it include my very infamous cut-through street, Conant Street? And I think another thing that's really, really important that the town has to grapple with as it relates to transportation, accessibility, all that stuff is equity issues between how West Concord is seen and how Concord Center is seen. And it comes up time and time again. And it seems like the only people who are bringing it up are people from West Concord. And here's the refrain. Well, it is West Concord after all. So, thank you.
But that's a good thing, Cynthia.
I thought we were.
We love West Concord.
Yeah.
Hey, we do. That's why we live here. But we'd also like a little attention. And my concern, I was going to say fear, just going to say my concern is now that Commonwealth Ave has these new sidewalks, that's it. West Concord's done. We've been taken care of.
No,
Thank
definitely
you.
not.
Thank you for your comments, Cynthia. Ned Perry is next. If you can introduce yourself.
Good morning, Ned Perry, 362 Bedford Street from East Concord. I heard, I have 4 comments. The first one is a design manual. At the end, you talked about that. The State Department of Public Works uses a design manual that was put together for Strawberry Hill Road 15 years ago as a statewide design manual. So we have a design manual, at least in the archive someplace. And I would hope that the Public Works Department would be aware of it because they put it together and that they could expand on that or revise it, but they don't need to start from scratch. But back to the meeting. Early on, you talked about March 7th and the March 7th hearing. I think it would be helpful if the Selectman Ackerman would speak up to represent you and your positions and ask questions to bring out the maintenance issues herself, as well as members of your committee. Number 2, I find it interesting, or number 3, I find it interesting that you are assigned to work with a town engineer, as when you one speaks to the town engineer about upgrades and other changes, he essentially says, I only work here and I'm not involved with funding issues. So I accordingly, you talked about silos a little earlier, very briefly. I would respectfully suggest that you copy your communications to the Public Works Commission, the Director of Public Works, the Town Finance Committee, and the Select Board. So and most importantly, to Megan Zumato, who I think is making the decisions, but I don't hear her name much. And they all need to hear your great discussion. I thank you for all the time in reviewing all the documents and discussing these issues this morning. Year after year, the Director of Public Works presents at pre-town meeting hearings the chart showing the cost of delaying the infrastructure repairs. And it doesn't get to town meeting. One idea, you might suggest to the town moderator that the Public Works budget not be put on the rapid
Consent calendar?
Consent calendar. Thank you very much. I should know that. On the consent calendar, but that the Director of Public Works actually gets to present to the whole town meeting and therefore the whole town during town meeting to hear the issues that you are so rightfully focusing on. Thank you very much for this opportunity to provide public comments.
Thank you, Ned. We'll move on to Tanya, if you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Hi there, Tanya Galis, 62 Prescott Road, and Mark's wife. Well, I mean, for full disclosure, right? Okay, but Laura, I didn't see the draft you sent to committee members, so I also want to put that out there. So I don't know what was in it any more than any other member of the public found out today. I just wanted to, I don't know if this is of value at all, but since the question came like when and how Complete Streets was adopted in town, I remember a few years back planning board meetings where the town planner brought it to the planning board's attention and briefly described what it was, and essentially it felt like urged them to approve it, and that's how it was done. And I mean, I don't know if this is relevant at all or not, but I just wanted to put in that little bit of history that I was there for. In terms of your reservations that the Transportation Advisory Committee should not necessarily be the arbiter of what locations to choose as case study, I'm really glad that I mean all the work you are all doing, and it is complicated, and yes, there are differing opinions. So, however, when it's a main area where clearly everyone uses, and it's probably pretty safe for the committee to choose a spot to focus on without feeling that you're kind of leaving anybody behind or prioritizing something over something else. So I wanted to reassure the committee about that. In terms of Mark talking to Steve, and I know, I'm sure he will do his best to represent all the different opinions and everything. But like you said, if you're really looking for very clear transparency and to have all committee members on the same page and reassured, maybe Steve should just come to the meeting and hear from everyone what their concerns are. I'm just thinking about, just for simplicity and since you are insisting so much on transparency, and understandably so, it might be the best way. And also wanted to remind everyone about the League of Women Voters First Friday tomorrow morning at the library, where even more community input and discussion will probably be possible. And thank you all again. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. And we have Joseph McIsaac. Excuse me if I.
Hi, my name is. Sorry, 1 second.
Oh, I
Skip me
see
for a
you're on in
second.
2 spots.
Yeah.
So
Hello?
if you mute it, I think
Come back to me.
Turn off your speaker.
you have 2 devices online, and so if you mute one of your devices, that will help with the echo. So if you mute either the TV in front of you, or
It looks like he's on a phone.
yeah, I would say leave the sound on your phone, since you're going to speak into your phone, and mute your other device.
The sound, not just the microphone.
Yeah. Give it a try now.
Both of them. So it looks like there's somebody else,
Yep.
a Daniel Stapleton. Maybe we can hear from him and then.
All right, Dan Stapleton, why don't you go ahead while while our other commenter gets his sound sorted out.
Yes, hi, everybody. Dan Stapleton, 20 Conant Street, West Concord. Just I guess, a couple of thoughts or comments and maybe a question. Sort of listening in on the dialogue that's gone on and then thinking about it from the perspective I had as just sort of an interested citizen that's been attending the meetings and the public hearings. So the first comment was, as somebody who attended those meetings, just to give you that perspective, I had a really pretty clear understanding what Stantec's scope was. And I think I got that from that October public hearing, as well as on the town website, you have the PowerPoint presentation that goes through their scope of work. So, I guess I had the impression that scope was already pretty fully defined. And within that scope, the first few tasks were a lot of data collection and, maybe extending to that first survey and the first public outreach. And I thought one of the objectives of those first 3 tasks, plus the survey, was to refine the goals for the remainder of the project. So it seemed like that would be a milestone point to meet with, for you guys to meet with Stantec to see what their findings were, right? And how that leads into the next steps. The last comment I had, and I think as a citizen, a pretty educated citizen, but it's a little bit confusing, is, and this feeds back to what Stantec is doing. In their first few tasks, they were supposed to be compiling plans and policies, and the previous plans and policies or existing plans and policies, and I'm assuming that includes previous studies. So it's just, trying to understand the continuity and the connectivity with these previous studies. So as a citizen, they're listening today, there's all this talk about complete streets and totally on board with that. So conceptually, but I'm just trying to make the connection with like the study Jacobs did on complete streets. They did a gap analysis, identifying 52 possible projects. And it sort of feels like, oh, well, we're just kind of reinventing that now. Now, maybe it is time to, revisit it, but it seems like we should be building on that. And there are a lot of pertinent studies, like the traffic calming study, both by Jacobs in this case. But I'm hoping Stantec kind of brings those in and builds on those, because I've read those studies very closely, and there's actually substantial relevant information to where we are today. So that's my comment. But good job. Very interesting to listen in. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, Stantec has been compiling all of that data from all the different studies, and yes. All right, well, let's give Joseph another go at that. Can you unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Joseph McIsaac. I'm at Peter Buckley Terrace Senior Housing on Stowe Street. Thank you for letting us speak. I'm here with a few of my neighbors, and I just wanted to add, of course, we're part of the community that doesn't drive it very much. So as seniors, we're very interested in more robust transportation. One of the biggest challenges I have, I'm also in a wheelchair, but I'm not really, I don't want to talk about that. I want to say that this micro transportation system appeals to a large number of people who don't drive, especially children. You may not recognize this, but school kids jump on these buses all over the place, and it gives them a very secure way to get around town. As a parent, I raised my kids in Burlington. We had an in-town bus system, and it was great because I always knew the kids could routinely use that to get around. One of the things I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is this is not a bottom line loss leader only downtown transportation. I think it can have a lot of top line effects, but the net effect is you're going to bring a lot more people from the community into town, into both West Medford and center of town for commerce. But beyond that, I think that this ties in very closely with the tourism dimension of town. I mean, tourism is a huge deal. and an in-town bus route that is heavily used and promoted will have a positive top-line effect. You're gonna be, Concord will become a more attractive destination for tourism if there's a place you can park, so increased parking is part of this, and hop on the bus around town. It makes it so much more easier, and you know, it opens up consideration as Concord as a 3-day tourism destination as opposed to 1. So I think that you can also see this as a marketable, tangible asset that should make the town more attractive and yet still reduce overall parking and traffic issues, even with greater tourist participation. So think of that as well. I would bring in the tourism people into this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that comment, Joseph. And we also have Luis Suarez on here. You want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Los Suarez, 34 Everett Street, Joe's neighbor. We did a couple years ago have the tourist bus, and when you talk about practicalness and looking at it, it looked like it'd be a nice thing to come from West Concord to Concord and then go back to West Concord. But the time frame of the West Concord trips was such that, like, if you had a stroller and a kid, and you load them on the van, which would take that, then you came over here and had an appointment or even for coffee or something. It was very difficult to get back. The last trip should have included a swing to West Concord, which it didn't. I mean, I went and took a ride on it to see, and I tried to put my head like if I were, and there were a lot of glitches in it, and no one seemed to want to listen. That's one thing, and Joe kind of brought that up to me. The main thing I wanted to say is I am on a town committee too, Pollinator Advisory Committee, and I'm just here as myself. But one of the biggest things is, and it was interesting to hear you struggle with it, is we spend a lot of time learning, talking to public, working with the public as an advisory committee, and then our work goes back to, actually we're advisory to the select board, our work goes back, and there seems to very frequently be a gap in where implementation goes from all the work that we've done. And I just thought it was interesting. It was painful to hear, but it's honestly the truth of how things happen in this town, which is very sad in many ways, that so many people put so much expertise, and quite often professionals are hired too, and yet the action and the implementation doesn't seem to happen. And I understand it's a funding piece in there that's rather big, but just somehow or other, when we're looking at how to do things, that piece needs to, be ramped up and looked at in a way that things can really happen. Thanks again for all your work, and I've enjoyed your discussion very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will need to budget more time for public comments next time we meet. We are meeting every 3 weeks, so we will be meeting about 3 weeks from now. I will be sending out. Oh,
you got a good thing in Lois.
Oh, Joseph, I'm just gonna mute you here. All right, so we are going to bring this meeting to a close now. I do want to just make space for any other general public comments or comments from our select board liaison before we close the meeting.
I'm all set. Thank you.
You're on the open mic there?
Huh?
You're on the live mic.
I'm turning off the live mic. All right, so if there are no other public comments, I would entertain a motion to close this meeting. I'm sorry that it ran so far over, guys.
Motion to close.
Okay.
Second.
All right, Nick, how do you vote?
We don't really need a vote.
Yeah.
Aye, close.
Okay, Mariana?
Hi.
All right, Mark, Phil, myself, we're
Yes,
all in agreement. Thank you guys, for this, and we will meet again in 3 weeks.